Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. I'm Gary Polland, and this week's co-host is Jay Aiyer. Welcome, Jay.
Thank you, Gary.
And our special guest first, Sam Peña, our Houston Fire Department Chief. And this is your first visit. We welcome you here today, Chief.
Well, thank you, Gary.
It's an honor to have you here,
here.
and I like your uniform. And, of course, Marty Lancton. Marty has been a previous guest. He's the president of the Houston Professional Firefighters Association. And I guess he also works for you, right?
Yes, sir.
So he
yes,
kind of answers to you, but not all the time.
Well, I like to think that we are working together towards achieving the department's goals.
Good. Well, let's talk about that. And the topic this week, of course, is implementing Prop B. Prop B was the proposition that passed overwhelmingly to basically equalize pay between firemen and the policemen. Mm-hmm. And the citizens of Houston spoke quite loudly. They love the fire department. That's a good thing.
That's
yes?
a good thing. Yes, sir.
Okay, so the question is, how are we going to get this done? Because we're now, what, 4 months past the election? Has the pay raise gone into effect?
It is not. I think we're a little over 70-something days.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, almost going on 3 months. Okay, are we making any progress? There was a meeting this week with the mayor and his entourage, and I guess the fire union, and how many people showed up for you? Two?
Two. Yes.
Okay, and how many showed up for the mayor?
Yeah, I don't know, about 10.
10.
Yeah.
More than 10.
But you could have handled it by yourself with the mayor, couldn't you?
The mayor and I?
Yeah,
Sure.
Yes, yeah, you're very capable. And I've heard wonderful things about you, by the way.
Thank you.
You're a good chief. So where are we? Tell us inside story. Did we make any progress at the meeting, first from the union's perspective?
Well, I think that's the $98 million question, Prop B question, right? So what the firefighters have said on record for over a year and a half, in order to try to find a resolution with this administration, is that we are willing and have always been willing to sit down and have constructive, that's the key, constructive dialogue on a path forward. And what we had always said and what we're saying today is no different. There are two options that the city has. It is to implement the law, which is Proposition B. The city is in violation of the law currently right now. Or what we have said for over a year, implement Proposition B by amending the law through a lawful collective bargaining contract. Those are the only two options that the city has. And the city has continued to not have constructive dialogue, and the voters, nearly 300,000 of them, have continued to have their voices not be heard by this administration. So we believe it's way past time that this mayor implement Proposition B, and we're looking forward to a path that is fair and that works for everybody. But thus far, there has been no substantive dialogue past the meeting yesterday.
Or lawsuits, right?
There's plenty of those, right? Plenty of those.
We call it the Full Employment for Lawyers Act, is what these things. So, Chief, has the ongoing problem with first proposition being on the ballot and then implementing it, has that caused any heartache for you in terms of doing your job to protect Houston citizens from fire and other disasters?
I certainly want a well-compensated fire department. I think a mayor wants a well-compensated fire department, and the citizens of Houston have spoken, and they want a well-compensated fire department. And as we stand here today, you know, Proposition B is law, and we're working right now diligently, and we have resources allocated to ensure that we're implementing the steps and requirements to pay our firefighters comparable to what they have asked for in the petition. Has it made it more challenging? It's certainly, you know, because look, the financial crisis issue for the city is real. I have no reason to doubt the veracity of the finance director or the controller's information. And so, but you know what? The voters have spoken. They want this to be implemented, and they're leaving it to us to find a way to find a path forward. And that's what we're working on. We will find a path forward.
And that's important, but that's not the only thing the fire department of Houston needs to be the world-class fire department I know you want to have.
Absolutely. Talk
to us a little bit about the present status. Like one of the things I've always wondered about, why is it when I see an ambulance going to make a call that there's this, you know, hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s fire engine following behind it, and there's no fire? I ask, why is that happening? So why is it happening?
Right. I think most people would agree that it makes no sense to have a $1 million piece of apparatus, a ladder truck, responding to a low acuity minor emergency. The issue right now is that essentially the system has two categories. It's of response, fire or medical. And in the medical, really, we have an advanced life support or a basic life support. Once it passes that threshold, then everything is treated at the same urgency. And that's wrong, because when the weakest caller or the weakest link in the system is going to be the person on the other line, right? We're going to be depending as far as what we send on the information we get from the caller.
Right.
But if we consider everything an emergency without asking the proper questions, that's why we're sending the cavalry every time anybody picks up 911.
Let's take a step back from that, from the sort of the operational side of the fire department. Kind of bring us back to the $98 million question, as Marty.
That's the mayor's.
That's the mayor's. Yeah. Well, I mean,
mayor's number.
In fairness, I mean, City Controller Brown has said kind of similar numbers, and I think there's a general consensus is around that figure. How do you? Is Marty, it's your position that you can either collectively bargain and have a different sort of implementation process, or we do it all, right? Is that essentially what you're laying out?
Well, I mean, without getting into legalese, I'm not an attorney, but I can tell you it's quite simple. I think what the mayor and I think others discussed some months back, when there seemed to be a question on whether or not the rights given by the voters and the citizens of Houston to firefighters in which to enter into a legally binding collective bargaining contract somehow is not the same right that the voters then gave Proposition B to the firefighters. Seems to be that source of confusion that this administration has not been quite clear about. They took the position that somehow they didn't believe that a collective bargaining contract could amend the law by following the law and the rights given to the firefighters. Clearly, it is legal to do that. Clearly, it has been done not only 7 times in the city previously, but it has been done in every other major city, and nobody disagrees, and now we are at this point.
Well, I mean, at this stage, I don't know that the mayor is even disagreeing with you. I think everybody wants to go back to the bargaining table. I guess the question now is, assuming we restart collective bargaining, and we say that sort of the pay parity number, the $98 million becomes kind of the minimum, the threshold, you're amenable to kind of to a phase-in. Will your membership go for 4,000 firefighters, go for taking 3-4 years to phase this thing in?
You know, those are great questions for somebody to ask if they're willing to actually sit down and have a dialogue. But here's what I'm going to tell you. Proposition B is the law. Right now you have 4,000 firefighters in the 3rd largest municipal fire department. And that 70 some odd days after the election, firefighters have been sued, the city lost again, and now we have simply asked when this administration is going to implement what the law is. And what our attorney said yesterday I think is extremely appropriate. He said, Mayor, do you not believe that Proposition B is the law right now? Do you not believe that the firefighters are owed what the law says they're owed? And I don't think he had the response, didn't have a very, the response that I heard didn't seem to kind of answer that question. And so we're really looking for, what is the city willing to do? They have not reached out and given us proposals. They have not said what they're asking for. And what they're asking for is the firefighters to commit to some vague, odd thing that nobody can qualify, that you don't see in writing. And until that there is a discussion, Houston firefighters have committed to the citizens that they were always willing to sit down if people are willing to do so in a constructive fashion.
Chief, are you guys gonna come out and give him a counter offer as far as phasing in over time? And when can Marty and the firefighters expect it?
Well, listen, Jay, look, the mayor understands that the need to implement this proposition. We're moving forward in that direction. That's the right thing to do. And just implementing, just giving that paycheck is going to require us sitting down at the table. So we have to do that anyways, correct? And to say that the mayor is not bound or not moving forward in this implementation would be incorrect. Okay, I know that there are a lot of steps that have to take place first. There's over 50 wage types that we have to map out. There's 50 different incentives that have to be mapped out for 4,000 different employees. So, you know, it's not as a matter of flipping the switch. And to make that assumption is just a basic misunderstanding about what the systems require and how this proposition interacts with what we have in place.
Well, and that's a fair comment. However, assuming Marty is correct, it would seem like they're playing a game and they got all the cards. They're holding all the cards. You're coming to them and saying, I would like some of your cards so we can work together. So it would seem that he might be right that it's incumbent on the city to make an offer. Here's what we're looking to, here's what we can do. And look, we know that the city's position clearly is we can't afford whatever the number is, 70 million, 80 million, 90 million. We can't afford that now. We've got to implement that over time. So it seems to me there should be a proposal forthcoming, say let's roll this out over 2 years or whatever they're talking about, and give it to the union, and then the union go back to its members and say, okay, what do you think?
Absolutely.
We can do this. We don't want one city going bankrupt. We don't want any of those bad things happening. But I will say this. It seems to me as an observer who drives around Houston and pays taxes in Houston, though I live in Bel Air, but I still pay taxes in Houston because I have an office in Houston, and I spend a lot of sales tax money in Houston, that the city doesn't have its priorities straight. Politicians, when they run for office, always tell us it's public safety #1. But when you look at the numbers, it's not true. Your own department, sir, is under-equipped. You don't have all the ambulances you need to do the job that you would like to do. In a perfect world, right? Absolutely. You need more, and you have them crewed. And, of course, ambulances also bring in revenue. Not 100% of it, but maybe could. But you're not getting that. Well, that's because the city politicians are making decisions to spend money in other areas that they consider more important, like a homework helpline for $1 million a year, or music at the airports, or all these other things that are wonderful and sound great, but when you're not doing basic services, you kind of wonder, like, what's going on?
Marty,
anyway,
here's the thing is, look, when things get chaotic, we tend to focus on exactly on what's in front of us, right? Right now it's pay. Proposition B, like Marty mentioned, Proposition B is the law right now. We're moving forward to implement and get our firefighters paid. It's the right thing to do. But from my perspective, I also have to look downstream of all the other things that I am obligated to provide for our firefighters. I have an obligation to look after the welfare and the safety of our firefighters in this community. That means investment in trucks, which we haven't done consistently. In the last 2 years that I've been here, I've managed to double the amount of equipment that we've been able to acquire in trucks. That hadn't been done in 10 years.
The stuff deteriorates too,
Right,
depreciates.
it deteriorates. But I still have close to 50% of our apparatus that are over 10 years old.
Wow.
Over 50%.
I wonder how many of our viewers are driving 10-year-old cars.
Well, that's what we're dealing with.
Broken AC.
Our
in
facilities,
the summer.
yes.
Oh, with broken AC?
Look,
Oh, that's really bad.
And those are just basic items. Our facilities are in desperate need of modernization, right? That takes a significant investment. We were talking outside before we came in about the vehicle exhaust systems that we're getting a grant for, a federal grant, right? I started working on that the year that I came in here. It just now got to the point where it got through the whole process and got approved by council. That's a long-term goal, right, of outfitting all our fire stations, 94 fire stations, with those vehicle exhaust systems. But that technology is 15, 20 years old. So those are things that we needed to update. We're working with almost a 20-year-old computer-aided dispatch system at our 911 system. Wow. Okay, so look, the issue right now or the conversation is strictly about pay. But from my perspective, there are a lot of other hygiene factors that need to be addressed. Fleet, facilities, health and safety, professional development for our firefighters. We haven't invested in those. And it's not this year or last year. It's been 5, 10 years that it hasn't happened. And not investing in our firefighters, not investing in the membership has an effect. If you start monetizing the effects of lack of training has on efficiencies, on response times, on property loss, on patient care, on injury rates, you can start seeing that we're leaving money on the table by not addressing a core function. That is strictly in my wheelhouse to advocate for. When my overhead goes up, and 91% right now is dedicated to personnel services, to people, wages and salaries, 91% of my budget. When that cost goes up, I anticipate it's going to be more difficult for me to gather resources for the other things that I need to provide for this organization, for the men and women, for the tough men and women of this fire department that do an excellent job every day. And I need to provide those
well, also
systems.
for public safety. So, Marty, what do we do? I mean, the fire department is underinvested, doesn't have the resources the chief needs to do the job he would like to do if he was allowed to.
I don't disagree with anything that the fire chief just said. I think one of the biggest things is prioritizing what is truly what taxpayer money should be spent on. And I agree with you. I think public safety is always, you won't hear anybody say that public safety should not be #1. right? But I think what has happened, and it has not just happened in the last few years. I have been very clear about that. This has started, I think, over a decade ago, where there has not been a consistent investment within the infrastructure of the Houston Fire Department. And if you don't look at this from an upkeep perspective and allocate the CIP money dollars, allocate what is a priority to the city of Houston in taking care of, number one, the number one important thing is to take care of the firefighters to make sure they're healthy and they can go home to their families so that they then can take care of the citizens. Because a sick or an unhealthy firefighter that is going through cancer treatment and that's catching cancer at an unbelievable rate can't go out there and do the job that they so heroically do every day. We have we have another active firefighter, a captain at Station 13 that just had surgery for cancer. I think that's about our 8th or 9th active firefighter that has cancer. So this is a real issue. So there are issues as it relates to pay, when it relates to health and safety issues. And these are all things that we have put more than $1 million in the data and the research and the analytics in which to show there needs to be a long-term and a short-term fix for all of these things. And Chief Peña and I have worked tirelessly to try to do the things that he's given the resources to do. And I'm going to continue to advocate, to get that done.
Yeah, I think we all agree the deferred maintenance problem is just massive there. The lack of investment's been massive. Frankly, what probably I would argue is the root cause of this is the underinvestment, in large part because of the revenue problems with the city of Houston. I know people like Gary here love to squeeze every dollar out, but the simple fact of the matter is much of the decline on investments in fires came with the imposition of the revenue cap. And I will say this, I'm sure the chief and Marty would agree, that if we had a public safety exception to the rev cap, we do. If we continue with that,
they didn't get the money.
We did not.
I know. Well, we got it for police. We didn't get it for fire. We needed one for fire now. That would solve some of this problem. But let's get back. And we could spend an entire show talking about the operational issues of fire. But I do want to talk about again on the implementation side, because one of the things that's got me, when a law is in effect, you don't have the luxury of a phased-in approach.
Well, you can negotiate it.
Well, that's debatable, and I think the courts will see it. And I tend to think you can't, but let's just say, for argument's sake, you can. The point. Well, you and I can debate it, but it doesn't solve any problem. My point is, what are you doing now to get the money to deal with the issues of pay parity? How long will it take you, as on the implementation side, to get the firefighters the resources they need or they've been promised by charter?
Mm-hmm. So, going with the assumption that it has to be paid this year. Especially halfway through the fiscal year, right? We're halfway through this fiscal year. Then really there is no other area but cutting personnel. I mean, $100 million is significant. At this point, with the budget already set, with the expenditures, and most departments this deep into the fiscal year have already procured the items that they've budgeted for. They should have, or else they're way behind the 8 ball,
or they have too much money,
or they're fat to begin with, right?
Right.
Which I don't know that's the case. Now, listen, it's hard enough to provide fire and emergency medical services with the current budget that I have right now. My budget, the operating budget, the day-to-day budget that I have to run the fire department, 94 fire stations, has remained essentially, at best, static for the last several years. This year's fiscal budget is the same as fiscal year 16, okay? But the cost of doing business has gone up exponentially. As an example, one pharmaceutical, one drug that we use in delivering emergency services, went up between 76 and 90%, just one of them. That is the trend of all our materials. And although my budget is significant, it's $503 million, right? But operationally, I'm working only with $20 million, right? And that is to run 94 fire stations, equipment, supplies, materials, everything we need for our firefighters to do the job that they do.
The mayor says you have to cut 985 firefighters.
Well,
is that correct?
Look, $98 million would equate to about 850 firefighters. If I reduce 850 firefighters, we don't have a fire department, okay?
It's gone.
It's gone. So bridging that gap, that $98 million gap, is not going to be able to be done within the fire department. Without My overhead went up by 20%, $98 million at minimum, right? I either need an increase in my budget of $98 million, or we have to find a way structurally, citywide, not just within the fire department, citywide, to be able to bridge that gap. The taxpayers are tapped out. I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that. We have to look internally as a city, I believe. This is Sam Peña's opinion. As a city, we have to look internally first to create those efficiencies, to find those efficiencies within the system before we go back out, because it's not an endless well.
That's less than 1%. That's less than.
And I appreciate those comments, Chief. I was going to say, because some people believe that the taxpayers are they're like sheep to be shorn. You just keep coming back and keep taking. And so the revenue cap argument.
Taxpayer, not you, buddy.
Well, I pay taxes. I pay property taxes.
You don't pay city taxes, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I'll show you. I have the proof of the office.
You can bring that next time.
Yes, I will. But at any rate.
My taxes aren't that good. I mean, when Harvey came and it flooded everything in Meyerland when I'm...
Well, not everybody. But what I was going to say was, if you look at city's revenue, city revenue is exceeded inflation despite the revenue cap. The problem is, and this is where my friend Jay and I disagree, the first problem is, like you say, Chief, we've got to look inward. We've got to look at how we're spending money. We've got to look at what our priorities are and what's important. If things are not a priority, then you don't fund them. You can't do everything for everybody unless you take all the money. So giving them more money doesn't mean the fire department would get it. We played those games before. Marty, you've mentioned that. So the answer is, first become more efficient, establish your priorities, and then I think a perfect year to have this debate is probably this year in this election. We're going to have a hotly contested mayor's race. Why don't we have a debate about what the priorities are for the city going forward, and let the people vote for the candidate who they believe most reflects their priorities personally for what should really happen in the city. And that may be the way to go.
Let me say this, Gary. I don't want to shift the obligation to outward, right? Because I have a responsibility as your fire chief for this city to look at my processes as well and look for efficiencies internally. So when I'm saying the city,
that's part of the city.
Yes,
right.
I'm including myself, and we see several areas where we can make improvements. Some are minor. We're talking about nibbling around the edges.
Well, some may be collecting the ambulance fees that you generate.
And some are more substantive. Look, there is going to be a path forward. We have to find it. The voters of Houston have put this ask on us. They said, pay the firefighters what we voted on, find a way to do it. And it's on me to do it within my organization to find those efficiencies. But the responsibility is going to be shared throughout other departments, through the other 21 departments.
I'm going to just make a comment. If you have an FY budget that is that they do not discuss the speeding train that was coming down, that was sitting on the mayor's desk for a year, and then you ask somebody in which to come up with funds that's not in your budget, duh. It's not going to be there. The reality of what the priorities are for the city and what the city should have done last year didn't happen. And last point, because I know we're wrapping up, is that when it comes to a collective bargaining contract, if anybody believes that a collective bargaining contract cannot supersede or amend the law by a lawful contract, then I would say that the very thing that the Houston firefighters have done 7 times for a voter referendum through a contract, somebody needs to go to jail then. And whoever that was when the contract was there, every major city has done it. Every city attorney has said it. And there's 2 options the city has. Implement the law that the city is currently violating, or B, amend the law by following the law through a lawful collective bargaining contract. Houston firefighters have said it on record. We continue to say it. And that's exactly where we stand today.
Well, hopefully there will be some fruitful discussions like we've had today with you and the chief. I understand the chief's not totally in charge of everything. He does answer to other people, the mayor and city council specifically. But I don't get the impression, Jay, I don't know, you do, that the Firemen's Union is not willing to talk and listen.
No, we're talking and I think
maybe they should put us in charge. We can get this settled.
Well, we need to talk and listen because the money has to come from somewhere, and that's.
Have you thought about entering the lottery?
I will say this: you're not going to solve the problem until you get back to the table and you make an offer, and that's ultimately what has to happen. You know, it's going to be $98 million, which is, let's be real, it's 1% of the city's budget. You can reprogram 1% over time. I'll ask you this. Marty made a point. Final comment. Marty made a point, and I think it's a good one. The mayor's known about this for well over a year, the likelihood of this happening. And I'm a little surprised that there's not a plan ready to go day one in terms of what it is. So That's the only question I would have, sort of leave you with, or maybe there's a plan, we just don't know it yet.
Well, it's not that there's not a plan. Here's the thing: is that the city, if you go back and look at the budget presentations, they've gone into each budget year with a structural deficit of $120 million plus. So not that there wasn't a plan. It's just that that's what the reality that they're having to face every year. This proposition is gonna make it more challenging. But look, I don't want to scare people that things are going to fall apart, right? But we're going to find a path forward. Well, the decisions are going to be tough, but we're committed to providing the service that this community is expecting.
Chief Peña, thank you so much for coming. I want to say that the city's lucky to have you as police chief. I mean, fire chief. Maybe you do a good job as police chief too. You could do both. That'd be the problem. But you're doing a great job, and obviously, Marty, you're doing a great job for the firemen, and hopefully this will all get sorted out, and we can have a city that actually has priorities. Jay, as always, a pleasure having you here. Thanks for being here this week on Red, White, and Blue, and we'll be back next week with another interesting show.